Another episode of Empower Online then, guys, and today I'm catching up with Jake Clarke, who is an awesome boxer. He's the co-director of the Ghost Fighting Method with Phil Norman. He's got a pro record for 8 wins and 1 loss at the moment with 0 draws, and he's been training kickboxing, boxing, combat arts since the age of 10, and I've been lucky enough to train on a few seminars with him and meet him a few times, so it would be good to have a little catch-up. Jake, how you doing?
I'm great, mate. Thanks for having me. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's cool to obviously chat to lots of cool martial artists and people that are in competing, teaching, doing stuff, and making a bit of a name for themselves. So it's good to have you on, my friend. We will go back to the start. When did you first start doing your martial? You can't go, oh, you're still young.
No, you're fine. No,
still a young man.
It's quite far back now. It's quite far back. But yeah, mate. So I started kickboxing when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
And initially, I only really started because I was quite small for my age, right? And my dad thought, you know what, you got to look after yourself a little bit. And I think it's too far as to say I got bullied at school would be a bit of a stretch. But obviously, I was maybe a bit of an easy target. I had a bit of a rough time.
Yeah.
It would be a stretch to say that I was bullied, but you know, I was an easy target. So I thought, do you know what? He's right. I got to be able to go and look after myself if I ever need it. So I started kickboxing at age 10, and I started with Phil Norman, who I'm still with to this day.
Perfect. Yeah. And what was it about Phil then that kind of attracted you in straight away?
Do you know what? At the start, I didn't know anything. I didn't really know anything to do with martial arts. It was more of a friend of a friend. And then when I started getting into it more, because I started training up until I was about 14. I was playing football up until I was about 14. And then you kind of get into that place where you're kind of growing up a little bit. And I was like, kickboxing's taking over a little bit for me now. I'm enjoying that a bit more, and loads of youngsters play football, so I started to kind of come away from that and just chase the training a little bit more than anything else. And then it only occurred to me then, so when I was training all the time, then I started doing my research on like certain boxers that I liked and certain kickboxers that I liked, and then obviously you dive into Phil's background, and I was on a gold mine without even realizing it.
Sure,
you know what I mean? I was like, and then you look at like Phil's background and what he's done. I was like, oh my God, like I knew he was good, but not to the level because I didn't understand it or anything like that. So what I did was did my research there, found that he trained under Trevor Ambrose as a boxing coach as well. So that was another thing that I found and then started researching Trevor. And then it was up until 16 years old. Sorry, I've got a guy knocking at my door.
It's okay.
Sorry, dude. Can you hear it? Did you?
Yeah, you're all right. Grab it if you want. Go say hello.
Dude, it's all right. I'm so sorry. What are the chances?
There'll be a short intermission, guys, while Jake goes and answers his door and see who's there. I could cut this out, but I don't really want to be honest with you.
There you go, exclusive, mate. There you go. Sorry, mate. Sorry.
That's all right. Don't worry about it. I was just saying I could cut that out, but actually I don't really want to. It's all good.
Oh, thanks for that. It's like, yeah, I'm good at editing. I'm good at editing. But no, so I was training with Phil. I think at 14, I kind of knew that I wanted to pursue something in kickboxing.
Yeah.
And I started just training that a little bit more. And at age 15, 16, I got my black belt under Trevor Ambrose. So that was a big moment.
Yeah, it's huge.
And again, look, Trevor was 5-time world kickboxing champion and is a bit of a legend in the kickboxing world. So to get my black belt under him is the first time that I really felt like a sense of achievement. Like I've done something really high level here, which is like the first time. And then so from there it's like, oh, it's okay. What's next? And I was getting a little bit handy at the sparring aspect, and from there, I think at 16 I started training for my first fight.
Right.
But a little bit before that, I had guys around me from the kickboxing club that I was in. And when I was about 13 to 15, it was an important kind of age period for me, those 2 years, because we still had 2 or 3 fighters at the club, which is at the time was known as SDCS, Self Defense and Combat Sports. Remember?
Yeah, yeah.
And we still had like maybe 3, 4, 5 fighters that were still competing in kickboxing regularly. So I just started to kind of jump in with them, and to be honest, I kind of got bashed around a little bit. That was my first sort of, and there was a little bit of a tough love thing from Phil, because this was when I was probably gaining a little bit of momentum. And initially, you'd have seen me at the start, and you would never have gone like, "Oh, this is the kid that's going to be. We got to really put some time into this one." Yeah, do you know what I mean? And like you'll know, and you'll have youngsters that you train even now, and it's sometimes, I think, when youngsters find it easy, they're quite good at a lot of different things, and it's maybe harder for them to stick at stuff because of that. Yeah, so that wasn't me. I wasn't particularly a natural, but I just enjoyed being around it and just stayed, really. But Phil was like, okay, you know, this lad's got a bit of dedication. Let's see what we can potentially do with him. See if he wants it. And for those 2 years, mate, I got a kick in. I really did, because I was training with guys that were training for fights.
Yeah.
And to be honest, like, fighting has moved on so much now that, like, we learn more about like brain trauma and the stuff, which is why obviously we lead on to Ghost in a little bit. Sure. But with the sparring and the heavy sparring, you know, the game's kind of progressed where we kind of know that that's not the way to really do it anymore, right? But obviously the old school kind of mentality was like, you need to spar hard, you need to take loads of shots, and
yeah,
exactly that, mate. And that was my kind of comeuppance for those 2 years. But to be honest, mate, I needed it, because I wasn't naturally tough by any means. So I think that was an important, 2-year period where I went through that, and I had my first fight at 16 years old, and that was a kickboxing fight. And I won that, and I stopped the guy in the first round. Nice. So there you go. So it did all right. It did all right for me. Yeah. And that was kind of my progression. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's an interesting perspective. I can't remember who put it on, but I had a little debate with someone on Facebook the other day. I don't know if you saw it, but someone said, like, hard sparring now, you don't need to do it at all. Like, you need to just train regularly and like train at kind of 60 or 70%. And I was kind of in the mindset of saying, yeah, I think I kind of agree with that. You don't need to go like 80, 90%. Both, like, it's not going to teach you any more than it would do at kind of 50, 60, 70%. But then a few other people jumped on that I know that are like professional kickboxers or old school kickboxers maybe. And they were like, no, you need to kind of beat it into them a little bit, and it will toughen you up. And like, until you got to that fight, you need to be fight condition ready. Sure. And you're not going to get that unless you hard spar. So obviously, as someone that's a professional boxer now, where do you kind of see that line? Because I see it being differentiated between what you want to do. If you want to be a professional athlete and you want to be a pro boxer, I'd say you've got to train hard and you've got to spar hard.
Yeah.
You're just doing it for like a little bit of fun, or maybe even amateur, semi-professional level. Maybe that intensity needs to drop down a little bit. But where's your kind of thoughts on, and did your sparring ramp up going from amateur to pro, or how was that for you?
Do you know what? It's firstly, I'll say by going, like, everyone has their own interpretation of what they think's right, and ultimately everybody's different. So different things are going to work for different people. For me, as I've got older, I think also you kind of get to that point where once you've had X amount of fights and you know you can take shots, you don't need to take any more. I think there is, to a certain degree, I think when you have people or youngsters that are not too young, but they're starting to come through and show a little bit, I think you need to, put it on them a little bit and put them in a little bit of hot water.
Yeah.
But just to kind of show them how it is. But I don't think it's something that, I think once you get past that, and the problem is when you see now and you see like professional fighters do it, and they're almost trying to like knock each other out now.
Yeah.
And as we've seen through the years, and it's like a lot of the damage is done to these professional fighters in training, in sparring, because the prime example that everybody goes to is Muhammad Ali, right?
Ali, yeah.
Now, like, he took some shots in fights, but for the most part, you couldn't hit the guy. So it's really hard to sort of say, like, well, how did he get, how did it come to the Parkinson's and all the rest of it? And maybe something was, the sparring had something to do with it. You don't know. So, like, for me, I think you got to find that middle ground. And I think that's a mark of a good coach as well. I think you need to be able to push your fighter to the limit. And body sparring's a good one. Body sparring, I'm a big advocate of body sparring because you get your distancing, your timing, your punch selection, and all the rest of it without getting hit in the face.
Yeah.
But again, sometimes you need a bit of a gut check, you know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's one of those. I think to a point, yes, and then after that, I think once you've had X amount of fights and you know how to get hit, as daft as that sounds,
Yeah, yeah.
take a shot. I don't think you need to do it after that, you know.
Yeah, just take the shots. Okay, perfect. So, talk to me then about starting to get a little bit more momentum in your kickboxing, because obviously you did really well in kickboxing. You got a K1 title, Southern K1 title, I think, and then
Yep.
IKF, British title,
Correct. Yeah.
the Five Nations title as well.
Yes. Yeah. So I started getting a bit of traction, and Phil had a belief in me that because I was still quite a nervy lad. I think growing up, I still didn't have loads of confidence, and even before I was getting to a level where I was doing all right, I still didn't know it really.
Right.
And Phil would just take fights for me that he believed in me more than I did at that time. But the relationship that Phil and I had, or still have, is very much like full belief in him and he said he would take a fighter. You ready for this fight? He'd be like, all right. Do you know what I mean? There was still that martial art etiquette as opposed to typical fighters etiquette. There's that slight difference where it's like, okay. And what was happening was, I was maybe had like 4 or 5 kickboxing fights. And then what was happening was it became a little bit difficult to match me because I started doing quite well. So I think after 3 fights, I had like 1 above waist kickboxing, 1 boxing, and 1 K1 fight. So I was just trying to take what I could at the time.
Sure, yeah.
And then I think my 5th fight was a K1 title, area title. And that was still to this day one of the hardest fights I had against James Freegard. Hard fight. It's on YouTube, that one.
Yeah. Check it out.
Yeah, difficult fight that was.
What was so difficult about it?
The whole time. Sorry?
What was so difficult about it?
Just the pressure that he put on me. And James Freegard is an opponent that has been like in the UK circuit a long time. And just the pure grit of the guy. Like, he will never stop coming forward. And I think I was still at an age where I hadn't really developed much. I think I was 18. So I was still kind of developing that power. But it was a real great fight for Ghost because it kind of highlighted that we did it a little bit differently. And it was almost like it was the perfect antidote for that style.
Sure.
But it's still nonetheless, I had to be super fit and super ready for that fight, which I was.
Yeah.
But I think this was only like my fifth fight. So to put in perspective of how early it was.
Sure.
And then a little bit later, the opportunity came up to fight for the IKF British title.
Yeah.
And again, I think this was maybe my 6th or my 7th, but it was the belief that I had. I trained like a professional, even when I wasn't. When I was an amateur, I trained really hard. I trained every day. I managed to get to classes and get to the gym. And I think at this point, Phil was giving me his time because I'd kind of earned it, right? I'd shown him.
Yeah.
So that came up, and I think that was in Kent, and the guy that I fought was currently English champion, so much more experience. But for me, for someone that only had a little amount of fights, I was maybe further on than what my fight total would be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
That's where that was. And then I think at this point, for a little bit, I was amateur boxing at the same time. I was amateur boxing at the same time. And I just thought, all right. And I think I had one more kickboxing fight because then from there, I was suddenly slingshot up the rankings from just sort of taking a last-ditch fight where I wasn't meant to be in it. I think that the fight got pulled. The other guy that was meant to be fighting in that, I think that got pulled out maybe like 2 weeks before. And Phil got offered it. I was like, yeah, we'll take it.
Cheers. Cheers, Phil. Yeah.
yeah. All right, nice one. I'll take that then. And it was like, oh my God, I'm still like 18 years. I'm like, whoa, British title. That's like mental. That's crazy. Like, okay, let's go for it. But then I kind of went from relatively unknown to being quite high in the IKF rankings, which then made me mandatory for the Five Nations title. So I was all British champion. He was all Irish champion. And they kind of one up from there. They brought out like a Five Nations title, and then so I went over to Ireland to fight for that, and I won that as well. So I I had good momentum. I had a good stint in kickboxing, but I think going into that fight, I knew that I was it was going to be my last in kickboxing, and then I kind of made the switch and really pursued amateur boxing after that.
What made you think then that's going to be my last one? Why didn't you pursue the kickboxing further? If you were doing kind of
Yeah, I think that it became we changed traction a little bit. I think it was more about like kickboxing is still a big sport, but I think in regards to like MMA and boxing in comparison, I think they're much bigger and they get maybe a much more credit. So it's like, okay, let's maybe go into amateur boxing, and and then became like a kind of an Olympic dream that we shared, and I eventually built momentum there. And again, there was a part of us as well, like for me and Phil, where a lot of people with Ghost would sort of say, oh, it wouldn't work in against this style, or it wouldn't work in like in K1, like if someone kicked your legs, it wouldn't work. So there was a little bit of like a typical fighter's ego, a bit of that arrogance with us, because we stem Phil and Xavier, we stem from fighters, so there's still a little bit like, oh, is that right? And there was still that bit where like, I'll show you, mate, you know, and so we would take anything, and then it was okay, well, against a good amateur boxer it wouldn't work, and then in the amateurs it works in like a football season, works in like seasons, and I think within 3 seasons I picked up 4 area titles, and I was ranked number 3 in the country. In my 4th season, I think I got to the ABAs. I think I got beat in the semi-finals from a guy called Callum French, who was on the GB squad at the time. So he just pipped me in that fight, and this was in the ABA. So these are the top amateurs in the country. But I clearly made a bit of a statement where I think after that I got asked to join the England squad.
Nice.
And it was like, oh, okay, well, clearly it can be. And again, that kind of that fighter's ego that we had, we were like, yeah, all right,
okay,
it's not going to work. It's not going to work, is it? We'll see. So yeah, there we go.
What was that experience like training with the England squad?
Good. Do you know what as well? Because I'm very fortunate. I think I've come from a martial arts background first. So although I can compete in boxing and kickboxing, I think generally speaking, martial artists are a little bit more open-minded. I think especially if they come with a little bit more of like a JKD mindset, where you absorb what is useful for you, and it's not one size fits all. Whereas boxing is changing a little bit now, and it is changing for the better. But I think initially they're quite maybe closed-minded. And it's nobody's fault. It's for generations. Maybe they've been told that it's one way, and these are your ABCs, and you don't veer too far from that. But then you get people like Lomachenko that come in and do it slightly differently, and then people go, oh, okay, well maybe we didn't have it quite right, or maybe there is a different way. And the great thing about that is that with Ghost is that we were preaching that like 10 years ago.
Sure.
But obviously no one would listen at the time, and we would have in fights, and we were having that success because again, Xavier was our MMA fighter. So I would compete in boxing and kickboxing, he'd be competing in MMA, and between the two of us, we were really kind of establishing the name for Ghost of what that is.
So amazing, cool. Let's talk then about kind of Ghost, because obviously that's the main kind of like
it's a big one.
It is, isn't it? And obviously, like I said, now you're the co-director of Ghost, and we were speaking just before we hit record, and you kind of take care of the instructors coming up, like online and like in person as well. But if they're in different countries, you kind of make sure that they're doing the right things, etc. So talk to me about the development of Ghost and how it all came about, because obviously it's such an amazing thing now, and it really has made waves. And obviously, you're a huge part of that. Phil's a huge part of that, and the mastermind behind it. And then, as you said, X as well. You through the boxing, X through the MMA, and then Phil through kind of his Carly footwork. I know he attributes a lot of that to the Ghost stuff. And then obviously his hugely influential background in terms of training with Guru Dan, and then being an early MMA pioneer as well. So as you said, you kind of hopped on at the right time with that, and
I think So
Kind of
I think so.
found your Yoda, and then no offense, Phil.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's fair enough. It's fair
Yeah.
enough. But yeah, I think, well, what happened was, obviously, like we said, I got my black belt on the Trevor, and then it became that kind of like, well, what's next for me now? And Phil, and I think Phil speaks about this as well, and he sort of said, like, well, we kind of got to this thing where I'm like, what's the progression? And he's like, well, I've got this kind of idea, and that's all it was. It was just an idea in Phil's head at the time, because the great thing about Phil is, for the most part, you have kind of fighters and you have like martial artists,
Yeah.
and some people are a little bit divided, and not everybody's there for competition. Some people are there for the art, and I think for the most part, like generally, fighters are tough individuals and they're conditioned to doing it one way, and they work hard. Whereas sometimes maybe martial artists are maybe more, I don't want to say intelligent, but maybe like, because it's not fair, because to fight you have to be a certain you have to really know your way around it, operating the
Sure.
ring. But in a martial art field, there's so much more to
Yeah.
kind of learn, especially if you don't stick to one art. Whereas so Phil had the kind of knowledge of what it took to be a fighter and a competitor, but also the knowledge in so
Yeah.
many different fields, like we said, about studying under Dan. And if you even scratch the surface of what Phil's achieved and what he's done and who he's trained with,
Yeah.
the guy would seek out the best in every department and go and train with him. He's like, all right, who's the best guy in boxing? It'd be Trevor. Who's the best JKD guy? Dan, and all these people. And then with that skill set, he's gone, well, I know what boxing looks like and stand up looks like, but what if I were to bring in some of these kind of elements of Carly, for example, and JKD? And that's where the very start of Ghost happened. And for Phil, I was like, right, well, I've got this idea. If you want to try it, so we started doing it a different way. And I think it was so against the grain, and it was so different from what people had seen. I think he's tried to show it to people before, but I don't think they really kind of maybe took it on, because it was like, I can't really get much power when I do this, and it's a bit kind of feels a bit goofy here. It goes against certain principles that you've maybe learned. Whereas like a young lad, 15, 16, that doesn't really know any better, do you know what I mean? That just admired Phil and was just like, yeah, I'll do whatever you tell me. Do you know what I mean? And to a certain degree, Xavier's a couple of years older than me, but he was still young when he, started training with Phil. So between the two of us, we were like, yeah, all right, Phil. And it was just having that full faith and confidence in him as our coach, and all the stuff that we've achieved between us. It's like just having that belief in him that Ghost is gonna work, and we've had success on it, but there's also that part of like, there's human error and there's system error.
Sure.
Right? Like we're still human beings, and through, like, Xavier and I have probably had nearly 100 fights between us.
Yeah.
Right, which is crazy to think, right? But from there you kind of develop, well, this works, this doesn't. How can I change this to make it work? And then you think, right, so we'd come up and maybe a fight wouldn't go our way. And it was like, right, was that the system, or did I just do a bad job? Because sometimes that happens. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes I think a lot of people in the early days were waiting for us to kind of slip up.
Yeah, you're waiting for the trip up and go, it's Ghost. Yeah, it doesn't work. Blah,
yeah,
blah.
I told you that doesn't work. But there's definitely fights that I've come out of and maybe not performed and gone, and straight away I've not gone, it's Ghost or it's Phil's fault. It's, you got to be able to, when you're a competitor, you got to be able to self-reflect and look at yourself and think, right, why was that not good enough, and why did I not achieve what I should have, right? Because it's got to start somewhere, and a lot of the for fighters, it's an easy cop out to blame the coach.
100%. Yeah. What did the early Ghost look like then, and how's it kind of developed now, as you say, kind of 10, 12, 13, 14 years later? And how do you think it will develop, in another 5, 6, 7, 8 years?
Well, what we've had is obviously, through the great thing about Ghost is we can trial it and we can test it, because we're regular with it. Whereas I think sometimes in self-defense arts, you get in trouble because a lot of them you're doing them in the street. Do you know what I mean? It's a little bit less easy to test it. Well, we're going against good athletes regularly to try this, and I think initially, so some of the concepts that we have and some of the principles we came up with more principles of Ghost as we went through. So, for example, the third principle of Ghost is constant movement, where we found out that even if we get ahead of the guy, right? So if I've stepped down, I'm 1 beat ahead, eventually this guy's going to try and reorientate on us. So for the most part, we used to be able to step in an angle and do like 2 or 3 punches, right? Problem with that being is like, well, you've got to have constant movement, because when I've gone like 1, he's now reorientating on me and going 2, 3, 4. So it was okay for like a single shot, but when you started going like 2 and 3, you'd get found out. So when I was in a K1 fight, and I'll tell you this story because this is funny, right? So I did this technique, right? We call it a switch and go. So I step and jab and I switch. And we used to do this. So we used to, right, one of our drills was, right, we'd switch, we'd go single shot. Then we'd go single shot, shovel hook or body shot, and we'd go 1, 2, 3. So hit 2s and 3s, right? And I did this one time, right, and I went 1 here. And then as I went to hit the body, he went right overhand and I went whack, and I got chin. I went, oh. That felt that one, but again, it's kind of like, it was like, well, that didn't work. Was that my fault? Yeah, maybe I could have kept my hand up better.
That needs an adjustment. Yeah,
I was like, well, look at it back, Jake. Your hand's down here somewhere.
Sure.
But the other part was like, right, well, what if I were to move on this one as well, and then what if I was to move on the next one after that?
Yeah.
So that's where the third principle of Ghost came in. It was constant movement. So the blessing of it is that we, over many of fights and many of years, we're able to progress through things that happen in fights.
Yeah.
Like, this worked, this didn't. Well, how do we make up for that? So over 15 years we've been doing it, and nearly 100 fights, we've developed it into what it is today.
Yeah, 100%. Perfect. Let's talk then slightly about you as an athlete then. So obviously we've talked about the fitness. You have to be super, super, super fit, I think, to be a to be a kickboxer, to be a boxer, you've got to be super fit. To be a ghost boxer, I think you've got to be a next level of fitness, because you say all about that constant movement again. You don't get that rest, okay, move around a little bit. No, bat. You cut angles, creating all the time. And it's knackering. I've done a few seminars. It's so tiring doing the ghost stuff. I'm knackered. So how do you keep yourself fit, and what does your training look like now that you're kind of coaching, you're also competing? Do you find it difficult to kind of straddle that line between being a coach, getting your own training in, and then keeping yourself fit and healthy as well?
A little bit. It's for the most part though, like, and this goes back into me being like a fighter first and foremost.
Yeah.
I think I've always had it drummed into me that the fight's most important. So fortunately, with Phil and Xavier as well, like, if I'm fighting soon, they will pick up a few classes and stuff for me. So for when it's fight time, I start dipping away from like 1-to-1 sessions. I dip out of classes a little bit. Just prioritize the training, because we have to, because that's what we do. It's what I know. Do you know what I mean? It's just like, people are like, oh, well, how do you manage it? You just manage it, right? Because it again, from a young age, it's what been drummed into me.
Yeah.
And it's funny you're saying about with the ghost boxing, you have to be super fit. It's because you think like your conventional boxing, you're either moving your feet, you're moving your hands, or you're moving your head. We're doing all 3 at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. Everything's going.
It's everything's going at once. So yes, it is good cardio. So it's such a great, ghosting's so great for your cardiovascular system. All right. And then the thing that's the payoff is that, oh, well, you have to be super fit for that. And I'm like, yeah, you do. But the trade-off is you're super fit and you're moving a lot and getting hit less.
Yes.
Like, for me, that's a trade-off that's worth. People are like, I could just stand and do this. And I'm like, you could. You could. Yeah, fair enough. It's not for me, though. I'd rather move and not potentially get hit. And it's like, do you have to be fit to do that? Yes, you do. But for me, that makes sense. It's a good trade-off.
Sure.
And for staying fit, something that we've not mentioned, that we spoke about before we started recording, was I'm actually a type 1 diabetic.
Yeah.
So I got diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 16 years old. So I have had now 58 fights competitively, like boxing and kickboxing. That's my amateur and my pro all together. Now, out of those 58 fights, I think my very first one at 16, I wasn't diabetic yet. But what happened was I've had celiac disease forever. So that's like an intolerance to wheat and gluten. I can't touch it. And it goes back to as why I was so small I was for my age, right? So it's essentially, it just stunts that growth. So anything that I was eating wasn't digesting. And so we figured that out at 15. And you go back 15 years when, like, you hear about gluten-free and stuff now.
Yeah,
15
yeah.
years ago, dude,
Yeah, yeah,
no one
sure.
knew what it.
Yeah.
No one knew what it was. So we got that squared away. We learned about what my dietary requirements were. And then a year later, at 16, I got really ill again. And I think I just had my first fight and won. It was like, but I would get up, and then I'd maybe walk to the kitchen, and I'd have to sit back down again. I was like, I can't. I'm not well here. Something's not quite right. Because I know I was super fit because I was training all the time. But I was like, dude, I can't walk up the stairs without getting like tired.
Yeah.
I was going to the toilet all the time in the night. Like 5-6 times. And so they took me to hospital. And they said it was a Thursday. It was a Thursday, the 10th of February, 2011. And they said, if you weren't here by the weekend, you probably would have been in a coma.
Shit.
So it's like, yeah, I think your blood sugars range for diabetics between 4 and 8, which is ideal. If you're not diabetic, between like 3 and 6.
Right.
So diabetics typically run it a little bit higher. I think mine was like 32 when I went to it. Yeah, so I was really not well.
Yeah.
And then it just became, my life was adjusting that. And then the next 57 fights I had prior to that is me being diabetic and managing that. And the good thing is with it is, like, I kind of don't know anything else. So throughout my kind of career, I've just had to manage it as best I can. And for me, the more that I made it an issue and the more that I spoke about it, I'd almost give it like a platform.
Sure.
And it's something that's maybe talked about more now since turning professional, because there's more hoops to jump through. And obviously, we mentioned at the start, my record for professional was 8-1.
Yeah.
So I lost my debut because my blood sugars went too high on the scanner.
Right.
So again, like, what's happened is through my amateur career, I kind of put it in a box. And I remember even at the England camps that I trained with, and they'd see, and I'd go and check I finger prick my finger. I'd check my bloods and stuff. People were like, oh, what's that? And I was like, yeah, I'm diabetic. And they just couldn't get their head around. They're like, really? Like, it was just blew their minds, right? And it was like, yeah, but it's just something that I've always cracked on with. And I've never been in that position of like, well, it's me, or what could I have done if I wasn't a diabetic?
Sure.
It was just, I knew I wanted to do well in this sport.
Yeah.
So I just cracked on and just got on with it and didn't overthink it. And I've probably had more people come out of the woodwork now and ask me about it since I've maybe talked more about it because of the professional boxing.
Yeah.
But it was never my intention, mate, to be honest, like to be any sort of spokesperson or inspire people. Again, from the mentality of like a fighter, I've just been all very, very self-driven.
Yeah.
And anyone that has got like a medical condition, the only kind of inspiration I can give you is you just have to really want it. And if you do, you will make it happen. And I always had to kind of keep my my medical condition in check, being a diabetic. And if I did that, it didn't interrupt any of my boxing or anything like that. I think sometimes you get a bit tired. It's quite hard and relentless being a diabetic every day.
Sure.
Like you have a fight and you go home after a fight and it's like, I'm still diabetic. I'm still going to wake up tomorrow and I'll be diabetic again. You don't get a day off. So it can be a bit tiring in that regard. But you just crack on and there's nothing that you can't do. If you look after your health, you can do anything you want. And that was my motivation as well, to be a really good diabetic and not be lax with it, because I needed to be in a zone where I can perform.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So after all my kind of amateur success in boxing and kickboxing, I kind of just put it in this little box and cracked on. And then turning professional. So they use what they do is you might see that in between rounds, I stand up in between the corner. So what I do is I have a Libra system on for when I box. Usually you'll see them with a patch on the back of the arm.
Yeah.
And what you do is you scan it. But and day to day, I typically have it there. But when I compete, I have it round like it's on the side of my butt, basically. And then what I do is Phil will scan the meter and then show the doctors. So my blood sugar has to range between 6 and 16 for a fight. If it goes below 6, they can call the fight off. If it goes above that, they can do the same. And in my debut, it went above 16 because it was the first fight I had with the Libra system. I've never really used it before, up until that point, and I only got on to using it because I needed it to. It was a necessary hoop to jump through to get to be boxing. So yeah, I did that, but it just spiked up, and it was just understanding that sometimes there's a slight discrepancy between the Libra and what your actual blood sugars are.
Right. Okay.
The most accurate one you can do is you can check your blood. You prick your finger and the blood comes out, and that's exactly what it is. But I think what this one does, the Libra does, it works on like the plasma. So there's sometimes like a little bit of a delay. It's not quite as on it. So what with the adrenaline and stuff, it kind of spiked it a little bit higher than what it naturally was. So they had to call the fight off, and it was like, oh, I'd worked. Yeah, dude, it was like, oh my God, it was like. I'd worked at 25 years old. I decided I was going to be professional, and then COVID happened. What crazy time that was! All right, and, so I had like 2-3 years of sort of sitting on the sidelines. Then I went through a whole year again of going, trying to get my license. And showing them that this is what I've done. But the good thing about that was my amateur background had kind of helped, because they're like, the guy's clearly looks after himself, or he wouldn't have achieved X, Y, Z. And so yeah, I waited like 3 years for my debut, got like one round off, and then they pulled the fight and I lost. I was like, oh
man, yeah.
I was like, oh wow, okay. But again, maybe like a little bit of stubbornness where I was like, oh, I can't finish on that. I can't let that be my kind of my finish. Do you know what I mean? That can't, my story doesn't end there, surely. So we went back and we were like, right, how do we make this not happen again? And Phil started recording everything, like writing the difference between I was like a pincushion, doing my bloods, everything. So I was checking my blood, scanning every round. We would try and simulate his fights as best we can, and it allowed us to get a really good understanding of what the sugar levels are doing and what the scanner was doing in relation to the real bloods and stuff like that. So since then, I've had 8 fights after that, and won them all. So yeah, so it's going a good way, I think.
Definitely. What's next for Jake Clarke then? What's next? What are we in now? March. So yeah, what's the plans for the rest of the year? And
well, do you know what? We'll see. I had a potential fight for April. But the date is going to be changed. So I'm yet to kind of hear on that. But we'll see, mate, because I've got a few other things, a few other opportunities that I want to reveal, but I'm not in a position yet where I can.
Okay.
And it's a little bit outside of fighting. So it's just I'm keeping my eyes and ears up and looking and see what else is going on, and it's still within this field, but some cool opportunities coming my way, and I'm getting I know, mate. I know. I'm getting married.
You're teasing us now. You're teasing us. You're getting married as well. Congratulations.
In July, yeah. I'm getting married in July, which is crazy to think. I never thought that would be on the cards for me. But
busy time for you.
Yeah, thank you, mate. Do you know what? I'm really for a long, long time, and me having nearly 60 fights, it's been my only driving force, and all I've ever wanted, and all I've ever been known for is that. But I feel more balanced than ever. Because I've got that side of my life that I'm really, really happy in. Like, I go home and I close the door, mate, and I lock the door and I lock the world out.
Done.
And it's my little safe place, and I'm happy at home. Do you know what I mean? So that's really nice as well.
Nice.
And I think I've had that through my pro career, and I think that's been the best thing about being professional as well, because I've generally been a lot happier in all aspects. As, I think sometimes you can get a little bit like tunnel vision.
A bit more yin yang.
Exactly, mate. That's right. So,
exciting year for you then, dude.
Yeah, crazy year.
What about Ghost then? Where do you think Ghost is going to go in the next year? And because I know Phil's taken his kind of foot off the pedal a little bit with that, going to the combatives, and he's off being James Bond here, there, and everywhere.
Sure.
Leaves it up to you a little bit. So yeah.
Yeah, so Phil basically after 17 years and after COVID, so it was 17 years. So I've been co-director now for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And essentially what I do is I deal with inquiries about it. So if anyone wants to get ghost training, and I can point them in the right direction wherever they are in the world. We do online sessions once a week where the instructors come in. We also have some online students that are not instructors but are based in Australia and
Cool.
wherever they are, and they come in and do that, and that's on Saturdays. So I look after inquiries there, and I look after the instructors. So I just keep tabs on them and offer out, because what we want to do for our instructors, the hardest thing to do is kind of maintain that level.
Sure.
To be an instructor, obviously you need to be here all the time, and the hardest thing, like you said, is I think when you start going into coaching, it's really, really difficult to still get your own training off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know, because you do it for the students from now on, and you prioritize the students, and you do it for them. And but in the same regard, I think you still need to keep yourself at a certain level. So that's what the Zoom classes are there for. So for instructors, they come in once a week, and I keep tabs on them, just make sure they're doing right. And if they're not, I
whip them into shape.
Yeah, exactly. I can give them loads of grief. But yeah, so I look after them. Yeah, and it's good. And we got instructors now in Germany, in Denmark. We got loads in the UK, but we've got based around. We're dotted all over the place. A couple now in the States.
Yeah.
We had an instructor, Russell DeLay, that was recently in the US, and he taught in the Martial Arts Hall of Fame over in the US in Vegas, I believe it was, which was really, really cool. And I'm so proud of my instructors, and so proud of what they're doing and the way they're pushing it out there, and they all have classes going, and they're enthusiastic about it. And yeah, it's really cool to see. That's something that obviously Phil's invented, but I had a big part in playing and helping its growth. To now see when you see stuff like that, you're like, oh, that's awesome. Like I indirectly help somewhere to help that happen. And,
100%.
Definitely a sense of pride that comes in when you see that. You're like, oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's well founded as well, buddy. Thank you. I will let you get off. That was amazing. Thank you, Jake. Obviously, you're a gentleman. You're an awesome fighter. You're an awesome martial artist as well.
Thank you, mate.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to catch up with you. Stop it.
Thanks,
it's always a pleasure to catch up, and hopefully we'll catch up face to face soon, I hope.
For sure. Yeah, I hope so too.
Right,
thanks for inviting me, mate, and thanks for hearing me out.
You are more than welcome. Cheers.